The ping arrived at 3:40 station time, and I almost didn't see it. That is the honest version of events, not the one I wrote in the after-action report. The report has a certain professional gloss that I applied carefully, knowing it would be read by people who had opinions about what a two-person listening post in the Yole corridor should and should not be doing at 3:40. But the honest version starts with the fact that I was on my third cup of reconstituted coffee. The console was cycling through its automated sweep, and I had been staring at the waveform display for 4 hours without a single anomalous input. The Yole 9 station runs a 6-hour rotation when it is staffed by 2, which means my shift partner, Specialist Arvo Nacht, was asleep in the secondary bay, and I was alone in the forward compartment with nothing but the hum of the relay array and the slow churn of the deep field scanner to keep me honest. Station Yole 9 is not a glamorous posting. I say that without complaint. I requested it, in fact, because it was the only open slot on the short roster that put me in the outer corridor, rather than the interior relay hubs where you spend your time watching handshake confirmations and uplink traffic from the settlement ships. Yole 9 watches nothing. It is positioned at the edge of a dead sector that was surveyed, catalogued, and then largely set aside about 230 years ago, when Earth was still building out the deep network, and optimism about galactic diplomatic integration was at what I am told was an all-time high. The outpost was planted, the array was anchored, a series of handshake agreements were executed with the 3 nearest alien governments, and then the politics shifted, the handshakes went dormant, and everyone forgot that Yole 9 was still drawing power and still running its automated sweep protocols, and still, in the technical sense, registered in the databases of those 3 governments as an active emergency backup node. That is the detail that matters. I will come back to it. The forward compartment of Yole 9 is 11 meters across at its widest point, and has a long curved viewport facing the star the outpost orbits, a dim yellow star that provides a reliable ambient daylight to the compartment during the facing half of the orbital cycle. At 3:40 we were in the facing half, so the viewport was lit with a low, warm yellow that fell across the primary console and made the readouts look more alive than they were. The console itself is a deep relay standard configuration, a center display for the active sweep, flanked by panels for signal analysis, archive access, translation layer, and the emergency broadcast monitor, which is the panel nobody ever touches because the outer corridor has not had an emergency broadcast event in the 11 months I have been stationed here. The emergency broadcast monitor has a small amber indicator light that stays dark under normal operations. During the 4 hours of my shift before 3:40, it had been dark. I had glanced at it perhaps twice, the way you glance at something that is always the same. At 3:40, the amber light was on. Below it, the directory match header was active in the incoming queue. I had worked at Yole 9 for 11 months, and I had seen the directory match header exactly once before, a routine automated ping from an Earth relay maintenance system confirming that our station ID was still valid in our own internal directory. I had logged it, dismissed it, and gone back to my sweep. So when the flag appeared at 3:40 on my third cup of coffee, my first reaction was professional routine. I reached for the console and opened the packet header. The originating address was not Earth. The originating address was listed as VTHANI Concord Emergency Broadcast Grid, Sector Relay Forward, Automatic Directory Query Response, followed by a 12-digit coordination code that resolved, when I put it through the translation layer, to something approximately equivalent to all registered backup nodes in range. Please confirm receipt. I sat with that for a moment. I read it again. I checked the translation layer's confidence score, which was high 94%, which for the Vethani administrative dialect is essentially certain. I looked at the emergency broadcast panel signal log, which showed that the packet had arrived at 2:53 station time, had been processed by the automatic directory match protocol and had been held in the incoming queue until the console flagged it during the active sweep cycle 47 minutes later. The packet had been sitting there for 47 minutes while I looked at an empty waveform display and drank reconstituted coffee. Then I read the rest of the header. The Vethani conquered is not a government I had spent much time thinking about. They are old, older than the current shape of their own borders, the way some governments are, and they are organized in the way that very old governments tend to be organized, which is to say by accretion rather than design. They build systems on top of systems. They inherit infrastructure from predecessor states and predecessor states' predecessors, and they document everything because they do not trust any single record keeper. So they cross-document and then document the documentation. And the result is a bureaucratic architecture of such scale and density that navigating it requires specialists. Their emergency broadcast grid, according to what I could pull from our own reference files in the next 20 minutes, had been expanded, contracted, merged, split, regionalized, centralized, and restructured at least 9 times in the last 4 centuries. The current version was the product of a consolidation effort roughly 60 years ago that had pulled together all of the emergency network remnants from the predecessor administrations and unified them under a single broadcast protocol. When they did that consolidation, they imported all the old directory entries. All of them, including, apparently, a diplomatic registration executed 203 years ago during a handshake between the then-current Earth diplomatic mission and the then-current Vethani regional administration, which had registered Station Yol 9, then newly operational, then considered a promising node in what everyone hoped would be a thriving network of emergency-ready waypoints, as a valid backup node in the Vethani emergency grid. The handshake had been filed, the entry had been written into the directory, and then the diplomatic relationship had gone quiet, and the handshake had gone dormant, and nobody had ever revisited the directory entry to ask whether it still made sense. It was still there, still valid, still active in the directory, carrying the same registration parameters it had been assigned 203 years ago. And when the Vethani emergency broadcast system had issued a sector-wide distress ping 47 minutes before my console flagged the packet, the automatic query function had sent a receipt confirmation request to every registered backup node in range, and Yol 9, because it had been running its automated protocols correctly for 203 years, because the hardware was maintained on a 2-year cycle, because specialist NACT had replaced the primary array transponder 6 weeks ago as part of routine maintenance, had responded to the query with the automated confirmation it was programmed to send. And then the grid had forwarded me the full distress packet. I read it twice. The packet was in the Vethani administrative dialect, which I do not speak natively, but which our translation layer handles reasonably well, because it is one of the 17 languages loaded as standard on all deep network relay stations in the outer corridor. The administrative dialect is dense. It uses a system of nested qualification clauses that can make a single sentence run to 60 words, while conveying less information than a direct statement in plain register would carry in 12. The translation layer has a setting for stripping the qualification structure and rendering the informational core, and I used it, because at 3:40 with the directory match flag active on the emergency panel, I did not have the patience for nested clauses. The picture that emerged from the stripped translation was specific and serious. A convoy of 11 ships, 7 civilian transport vessels, 3 service ships, and 1 administrative hub, had been transiting a sector corridor with a refugee population of somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 individuals, when a cascade failure in the lead ship's navigation array had caused the convoy to decelerate sharply and take an unplanned holding position. The cascade failure had also knocked out their primary long-range communications, which meant their distress signal was being broadcast on the emergency grid rather than through direct comm. Hence the sector-wide ping rather than a targeted transmission. The emergency broadcast protocol required all registered nodes to receive the distress signal simultaneously, so there was no way for the Vethani system to have filtered out a legacy entry from 2 centuries ago. The grid had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had told everyone on the list. It had told us. They were not in immediate mechanical danger. The ships were intact. Life support was running. People were frightened. Some were injured from the deceleration incident. The packet listed a number of minor trauma cases from the abrupt deceleration, plus 3 described as serious on 2 of the transport vessels. And the medical situation was characterized in the formal language of the administrative dialect as operationally strained with an urgency flag attached. But the urgency flag, I learned from the translation layer's annotation, is a standard attachment to any medical notation in the Vethani emergency format and does not by itself indicate a critical situation. It indicates elevated monitoring priority. Nobody was dying in the next 10 minutes. The problem was the navigation data. Because their charts listed the holding region as clear, and their charts were wrong. I know this because our own charts for that sector, inherited from the same 200-year-old survey data that had planted Yol 9 in the first place, showed something the Vethani charts did not. The deep relay stations in the outer corridor carry full copies of the original survey data for their regions. It is a standard archive, maintained as a backup for the navigation databases of any ships that might pass through without current charts. The archive is updated on a 5-year cycle from the Central Deep Network Data Repository, and it is thorough in a way that only 200 years of obsessive archival maintenance can produce. Yol 9 copy of the survey data for that sector was the most recent available, which was 60 years old, but 60 years is not old for a drift field that has been sitting in that region for considerably longer. A drift field is not necessarily a lethal hazard. For a ship with functioning navigation systems and accurate charts, it is a navigational inconvenience. You detect the boundary, you plot around it, you transit the safe corridor, and you note the detection in your log. Ships do this routinely. The drift field cataloged in our survey data for that sector was not especially large. It occupied a region of space roughly 12 light-minutes across, which is significant but not impassable. The safe corridor around it was clearly mapped in the survey data, with approach vectors and sensor parameters specified for several different ship configurations. But the convoy did not have that survey data. Their charts listed the region as clear, which meant they did not know they needed to plot around anything. And their lead ship had a compromised navigation array, which meant even if they had somehow suspected a hazard, their ability to detect and map it in real time was degraded. A convoy of 11 ships, several running on emergency power protocols, following a compromised lead navigator through a region their collective charts told them was safe, crossing a drift field their collective charts did not show. The drift field was not in their charts because it was old data, and their charts had been drawn from a later survey that had apparently not included it. The later survey had been conducted during a period when the diplomatic relationships in that sector had been different, and the survey access permissions had been different, and the data sharing agreements had been different, and the end result was that the Vethani Concord was operating with charts that had a gap in them, and nobody had known the gap was there. I opened the compartment door and went to wake Specialist Nacht. He was already up. The alert that had flagged the packet on the primary console had also triggered the secondary monitor's notification function, and Nacht had heard it from the secondary bay. He was not fully awake when I reached the bay door. He was sitting on the edge of his bunk with the focused look of a man who has been sleeping lightly, and is in the process of deciding whether what woke him requires movement. But he was moving when he saw my face. "Flag," he said. Directory match, I said. Emergency packet not from us. He was at the secondary console before I finished the sentence. He pulled up the packet. He pulled up the translation. He pulled up the survey data for the relevant sector on the side panel, because NACT is the kind of technician who goes to the primary source first and asks questions after. I watched him read. He has a face that is usually still, not cold, just settled. The way a person's face settles when they have spent enough years in relay work that most anomalies resolve themselves into known categories, and the face has learned not to waste energy on premature reactions. He read the packet. He read it again. He cross-referenced the convoy's reported position against the survey data on the side panel, moving between the two displays with the small, precise gestures of someone who has done this kind of comparison many times. He saw the drift field in the route. "How long have they been holding?" he asked. I checked the timestamp on the original broadcast. The ping went out approximately 50 minutes before the packet reached us. Add propagation delay and processing time. They've been holding for somewhere between 3 and 4 hours. 7 days to the nearest patrol, he said. Not a question. A calculation he was finishing out loud, so we were both working from the same number. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the survey data on the side panel, then at the convoy's reported position, then at the map of the safe corridor around the drift field. He did the same arithmetic I had done. He reached the same conclusion. "We have the data," he said, "not a question. We have all of it. The field boundary, the safe corridors, the sensor parameters for detection at range, the full survey block. They have an emergency broadcast address in the packet. The hub ship, still running the emergency array, even with the primary comms compromised." He looked at me with the still face. "The broadcast protocol says we need authorization for array transmission." "I know. The authorization officer is at Elicourt." 7 days away, I said. "Yes." We looked at each other. The relay station hummed. The sweep cycled. Through the forward compartment door, the viewport showed the dim yellow light of the facing star, warm and steady and indifferent. "They're going to cross the drift field," Nax said. "Not an argument, a statement of what the math produced." "Yes," I said, "or we tell them not to." "What do you want to do?" I had already decided. The deciding had happened somewhere between the secondary bay door and Nax's console. In the 30 seconds it took me to cross the compartment, while the arithmetic resolved and the resolution was simple. We had what they needed. They did not have it. The distance between those two facts was the only distance that mattered. 7 days was too long. 14 days, if you counted the patrol's travel time after being notified, was much too long. "We're going to give them what we have," I said. There is no protocol for what I did next. This is why the after-action report required such careful wording. I am going to describe it plainly here, because the plain description is more useful than the careful one for understanding what actually happened and what it was worth. First, I forwarded the full distress packet to Elicourt Station through the standard relay channel, flagging it as an emergency contact received via legacy directory registration and requesting response and guidance. That part was exactly within protocol. The nearest Earth patrol would receive it, would dispatch a ship, and the ship would arrive in approximately 14 days. That was the official response. I filed it, noted the time, and moved on. Then I opened the broadcast, array's transmission control. The array is a deep relay standard configuration capable of point-to-point transmission across approximately 40 light towers at standard relay power. The convoy's emergency address, extracted from the distress packet, was within that range. I had the survey data loaded in the archive panel. I had the translation layer ready to apply Vethani administrative dialect headers to the transmission so that it would be readable when it arrived. I composed a short header message identifying Station YOL 9, identifying the transmission as a navigational data package, provided in response to the emergency broadcast, and identifying the specific hazard the data addressed. I attached the full survey block for the relevant sector, the drift field map, the field boundary coordinates in the Vethani navigational coordinate system, the sensor parameters for detecting the field boundary at range, the safe transit corridor descriptions, and the approach vectors calculated for a mixed convoy configuration of the approximate type described in the distress packet. I reviewed the transmission package 3 times, I verified the address, I checked the translation headers, then I sent it. The transmission would take approximately 4 hours to reach the convoy's position. In 4 hours, if all went as planned and if the translation layer had done its work properly, and if the convoy's navigation officers were able to use what I had sent them, they would know about the drift field. They would know where it was. They would know where the safe corridor was and how to reach it. Then I went to the drone bay. Nact followed me without being asked. The drone bay at Yol 9 holds 6 courier drones in standard configuration, 4 large, 2 small. The small drones carry less cargo but transit faster, approximately 18 hours to the convoy's position against 36 for the large drones. The medical situation on the 2 transport vessels was described as strained, not critical, but strained has a way of becoming critical when the wait is long enough and the resources are thin enough. I was already committing to the 4-hour wait on the data transmission. 18 hours was shorter than 36. I opened the emergency medical cabinet. The cabinet held 12 sealed medical supply cases, standard issue, calibrated for human physiology, but containing several categories of supplies that are physiologically general enough to be useful across the range of species we are aware of. Wound closure materials, fluid replacement packs, analgesics in injectable and topical form, basic diagnostic equipment, 2 portable diagnostic units, a water purification kit. These were maintained for use by station personnel in the event of a medical emergency at the station. Deploying them to a non-partner vessel left a 2-person posting without emergency medical stores until a resupply could be arranged. I was thinking about this while I loaded the first case into the drone's cargo bay, running the numbers. Nact and I were 2 healthy adults at a posting with a 7-day patrol response time. The convoy had between 4,000 and 5,000 people, 3 serious medical cases already on the books, and a strained medical infrastructure spread across 7 transport vessels that had just undergone an abrupt emergency deceleration and were running on reduced power. The comparison resolved in one direction. I kept loading. Nact appeared at the drone bay door while I was on the 3rd case. He looked at the cabinet, 4 cases already in the drone, 8 remaining. He looked at the drone's cargo bay, which still had room. He did the same comparison I had done, or a version of it, in about 5 seconds. Then he looked at me. How much space does the drone have left? I checked the cargo bay telemetry. About 40%, maybe 45%. He turned and walked toward the secondary bay without saying anything else. I heard him pulling containers off the storage shelves. He came back with a load of the surplus ration packs under both arms, stacking them in the drone's remaining cargo space with the efficient movements of someone who has done cargo, loading enough times to know how to fit things without thinking about it. Ration packs, he said while he was loading, not explaining, stating the way he states conclusions. Yes, I said. They've been holding for 4 hours. Emergency power protocols, 5,000 people. Yes. We have surplus. Yes. He loaded the last of the packs he was carrying and went back for another armload. We did not discuss it further. There was not much to discuss. The math was the same math we had both already done on the navigation situation, applied to a different category of need. You have a thing. They need a thing. The distance between those 2 facts is the only distance that matters. He was right. The ration packs were not emergency medical stores. They were the surplus from 11 months of careful consumption, the packages that accumulate when two people eat slightly less than the standard allocation across a long tour, the extras that pile up in secondary storage because nobody has gotten around to returning them in the resupply exchange. They were not critical supplies for the station. They were 400 units of standard emergency ration packs sitting in a secondary bay. And there was a convoy holding position in a foreign sector, with 5,000 people who had been there for 4 hours with no certainty about how much longer they would hold. We loaded the ration packs. We sealed the drone's cargo bay. I set the navigation to the convoy's emergency broadcast position and confirmed the transit parameters. We launched the drone at 4:20 station time, 80 minutes after I had first read the full distress packet. Then I sat back down at the primary console and started writing the after-action report. This took considerably longer than the loading. The challenge with the after-action report was that everything I had done was, in sequence, reasonable and, in terms of authorization, outside my station. I had used the broadcast array without authorization. I had deployed emergency medical stores without authorization. I had used surplus station property for a non-station purpose without authorization. I had expended approximately 12% of the station's fuel reserve through the drone dispatch without authorization. Every one of these things was true, and every one of them would have been different if I had been able to reach Commander Patera at Ellicourt for a 7-day round-trip conversation. The after-action report had to contain all of it. I wrote carefully. Nacht came back into the forward compartment around 500. He looked at the broadcast log, the drone dispatch record, the relay channel confirmation. He sat down at the secondary console and ran a parallel sweep without saying anything for several minutes. The yellow light from the star moved across the console panels as the orbital cycle continued. The hum of the array settled into the background where it lives when nothing unusual is happening. "The inquiry," he said eventually. "Yes," I said. "Array use, emergency cabinet, the ration packs, the drone fuel." 4 line items, I confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. "Did you think about not doing it?" I considered the question honestly. "For about 30 seconds, I said, "while I was walking from the secondary bay to your console. And then I thought about where the drift field was, and where their route was, and how long the patrol was going to take to arrive." "Right," he said. We ran the sweep. At 800 station time, the translation layer flagged an incoming signal on the emergency broadcast frequency. The convoy's hub ship answering the data transmission, the signal carrying the 4-hour propagation delay I had calculated. I sat up at the primary console and opened it. It was not a distress signal. It was a receipt confirmation from the hub ship's emergency array, and attached to the confirmation was a secondary message. The message was in something between the formal administrative register and the plain conversational register of the Vethani dialect, the syntax of formality, but the word selection of someone writing to a person rather than filing a report. The translation layer marked the register distinction in its analysis header. The message was from Coordinating Liaison Marath Then, Administrative Officer of the Convoy, Hubship Sarath's Measure. She acknowledged receipt of the navigational data package. She confirmed that the data had been distributed to the convoy's navigation officers and Chief of Route Planning. She confirmed that the drift field described in the survey data had been detected by the convoy's own sensors, once they knew where to point them, at the position, and within the boundary parameters specified in the package. She reported that the convoy was implementing the alternate transit corridor and expected to achieve safe passage within approximately 6 hours. Then she asked who we were. The question was phrased with the careful precision of someone who has extensive professional training in asking questions that sound administrative and are actually something more urgent. She had run the originating address from my transmission header through her own directory records, and what she found had not matched anything in her current operational files. The address corresponded to a node registration from 203 years ago, which predated the current emergency grid configuration by several restructurings. The entry should have been cleared at some point in the past 60 years. It had not been cleared. And yet the node at that address had responded to the automatic query, and the node had transmitted accurate navigational data, and the drift field had been exactly where the data said it would be. She wanted to understand what had happened, given that what had happened had just navigated her convoy around a hazard that would have destroyed 2 or 3 of her ships and some portion of the several thousand people aboard them. The confusion was real, and the question was legitimate. She was not accusing me of anything. She was trying to fit a fact into a framework that had no slot for it. I can only imagine what that first read of the originating address looked like from her side. She had received a data package from an emergency node she did not know existed. The node was registered in her own emergency grid, which meant the grid's own directory had recognized it and forwarded to it, which meant the grid's own systems had decided the node was valid. And the node had transmitted survey data that had been accurate. The drift field was exactly where the data said it was, detectable by their own sensors once they knew to look, positioned precisely as described in the boundary coordinates. The data had worked. The node was real. The address was real. And the address resolved to something that predated the current Concord's emergency grid by more than a century and a half. She had spent time looking at the originating address before she wrote back to me. I know this because of the timestamp on her message. It was not an immediate reply. She had received the data confirmation from the navigation officers, had verified the drift field detection, had confirmed the alternate transit corridor was being implemented, and then she had gone to the directory records. She had run the address through the current operational database and found nothing. She had run it through the historical database for the past 60 years and found a legacy flag. She had followed the legacy flag backward through the consolidation records. And at some point in that process, standing in the administrative hub's command center with 5,000 people in the convoy behind her, and a drift field now safely behind them as well, she had found a node registration from 203 years ago, and realized that whatever had sent her the data package was listed in her own emergency grid as a valid backup node, and had been listed there, continuously, for the entirety of her career, and the entirety of her parents' careers, and the entirety of the careers of the diplomatic officers who had restructured the grid 9 times without removing it. I wrote back. I kept the reply simple and accurate. Sergeant de la Vasse, Communications Officer, Station Yole 9, Earth Deprelay Network Outer Corridor. I explained the legacy registration, the 203-year chain of custody, the diplomatic handshake, the automatic query function, the forwarded packet. I explained that we did not have a ship to dispatch and that the nearest Earth patrol had been notified and was approximately 7 days from our position. I explained that we had transmitted the survey data because it contained information directly relevant to their safe transit. I noted the courier drone's manifest and ETA. I did not explain the authorization situation. Liaison Then had 5,000 people to manage. Her reply came 7 hours later. By that time, the convoy had confirmed safe transit through the alternate corridor. NACT had taken the primary console. I had slept 3 hours in the secondary bay and woken up with the quality of alertness that comes after a significant decision made in the small hours of the night. Not anxious, exactly, but aware in a particular way, the way you are aware of a thing you have set in motion and cannot now unset, and are waiting to find out what the motion costs. I read Then's reply with the morning ration and the translation layer running on the compartment screen. It was longer than her first message, significantly longer. Liaison Marath Then had spent the 7 hours conducting what appeared to be a thorough administrative audit of the relevant records, working through the archived databases of the predecessor administrations that the current Concord had absorbed over the past 60 years, tracing the YOL 9 registration from its origin through each restructuring of the emergency grid to its current status. The picture she assembled was detailed. What I know about Then's own position on the night of the incident comes partly from that 7-hour audit and partly from a subsequent exchange, a few weeks after the formal agreement was signed, when she sent me a message that was longer than any of the administrative communications and was written entirely in the plain conversational register. She did not explain why she was writing it. She had been in convoy administration for 22 years, as she had noted in her first reply, and in that time she had managed 7 emergency holding situations: engine failures, navigation failures, political closures of transit corridors, and in every one of those situations the framework had been the same. Send the distress call to the appropriate authority, wait for the appropriate authority to respond, manage the situation with the resources available until that response arrived. The framework was reliable. It was slower than you wanted always, and it required a certain discipline of patience that she had spent 22 years learning, but it worked. When you sent the call to the right address, help came. On the night the Cascade failure had brought the convoy to a halt in a region their charts listed as clear, she had sent the call to the right address. She had used the emergency grid. She had broadcast on the standard protocol. She had followed the framework. And then a data package had arrived from an address she had never seen, transmitted by a node she did not know existed, registered in her own emergency grid under a flag that had been pending review since before she was born. She told me that she had read the originating address on the data package 3 times before she sent it to the navigation officers. She had been certain, reading it, that it was some kind of error, a transmission artifact, a corrupted header, something that had malfunctioned in the forwarding process. She had sent it to the navigation officers anyway, because the data itself looked coherent, and they needed to verify whether the drift field was real. And the drift field had been real, detectable at the position and boundary described, sitting precisely where the data said it would be, directly in the route the convoy would have taken if they had not known to avoid it. After the navigation officers confirmed the detection, she had stood at the command console of the Sarath's measure for a while without doing anything administrative. She had looked at the drift field on the navigation display, a real thing, documented now, mapped now, visible as the sensors swept its boundary, and she had thought about the route they would have taken without the data. Then she had gone back to her own console and begun the audit. She had found the original registration document from 203 years ago in the archived records of a predecessor regional administration. She had confirmed that the registration had been carried forward intact through each subsequent grid restructuring, tagged in each iteration as a legacy entry of uncertain status, flagged for review in the next administrative cycle. The flag had been carried forward with the entry each time. The review had been noted as pending. The cycles had closed and opened. The review had never been conducted. She had also found a brief notation from the original diplomatic handshake, not the formal agreement itself, which was in a different archive, but a one-line note from the Vethani diplomatic officer who had countersigned the registration, written in the informal notation style of that period. The translation layer rendered it. Earth Station confirmed responsive and well supplied. Recommend retention in emergency directory pending formal review of regional handshake protocols. A reliable node is not easily replaced. The formal review had apparently never occurred. Then included the notation without commentary as a piece of documentation. The administrative register does not typically have room for material that is not directly informational. Including it was a choice. The rest of her message was administrative. She requested confirmation of the courier drone's ETA and manifest contents. She reported the current medical status on the two transport vessels: stable, improved since the transit stress had resolved, the three serious cases from the deceleration incident receiving treatment and expected to recover, the convoy's medical staff noting that the situation remained manageable. She notated that she was filing a full incident report with the Vethani Emergency Grid Administration, which would presumably result in someone finally reviewing the YOL 9 entry. She expressed, in formal administrative language, something the translation layer rendered as appreciation for the timely and accurate provision of navigational data. At the end of the message, below the formal sign-off and below the notation referencing the original registration, there was a single additional line in plain conversational Vethani, not the administrative dialect, but the register you use when you are talking to a person. The translation layer rendered it this way. I have been in convoy administration for 22 years. We have protocols for most situations. I did not have a protocol for this one. I am glad you did. I read that line several times. In the subsequent exchange, the one in plain conversational register a few weeks after the formal agreement, she elaborated on it slightly. She had meant it literally. 22 years of holding situations, and in every one of them the framework had held. You sent the call to the right address. The right address responded. You managed the interval. The framework was reliable because the right addresses were reliable. They had been built to be reliable, and they performed as built. She had not sent the call to us. We were not the right address. We were not an address she had known existed. The framework, from her side, had produced something the framework was not supposed to produce. A response from a direction she had not looked, from a source she had not known to expect, carrying data that had come from a survey conducted 2 centuries before the current grid was built. The framework had not failed. It had, in some sense, succeeded in a way that exceeded its own design, because of an entry that nobody had removed. She said that after she filed the incident report and the convoy was safely underway, and the immediate operational demands had settled, she had spent some time thinking about the pending review flag, about the 9 restructurings and the 30 seconds it would have taken, at any point in 203 years, for someone to look at the flag and remove the entry, about whether she would have removed it if she had been the one to look at it, about how a reliable node persists not because anyone decides to keep it, but because nobody gets around to removing it, and what that says about how the systems that keep people alive are actually built. She did not resolve the question in the message. She said she was still thinking about it. I read that line several times. Then I filed the message and wrote my reply, which confirmed the drone manifest in the ETA and closed the administrative loop. I did not address the last line. It was outside the scope of the exchange, and I did not know how to answer it accurately in language that fit a relay log. The courier drone arrived at the convoy's position 18 hours and 20 minutes after dispatch, 20 minutes over estimate, within variance. Then's manifest acknowledgement confirmed receipt of all items. The ration packs were listed as the most immediately useful item. Distribution had begun within the hour. 2 of the sealed medical supply cases had been opened to supplement the convoy's stores. The 3 serious medical cases were noted as stable and improving. The Ellicott Patrol, the frigate Cavendish Run and her escort corvette, arrived at the convoy's position 7 days and 4 hours after I had forwarded the distress packet through the standard relay channel. By that time, the convoy had completed transit to the Vethani safe lane, had completed repairs on the lead ship's navigation array, and was 2 days into its onward transit to the destination. The Cavendish Run met them in the safe lane, ran a standard wellness check, confirmed all 11 ships operational and all personnel accounted for, and filed a response-complete report with Ellicott Station. The patrol commander's notation on the anomaly section of that report said, "Arrived to find convoy safe, repairs completed, medical situation stable, Navigational data provided to convoy by Station YOL 9, YOL corridor prior to patrol arrival. Recommend review of YOL 9 station action. Outcome positive. Authorization status unclear. That sentence kicked off the inquiry. Commander Reese Patera at Ellicourt Station conducted it over 2 sessions. She was not looking for a reason to make the outcome worse than it was. She was being precise about a situation that required precision, which is different from looking for an excuse, and the difference matters. She went through the after-action report line by line. The broadcast array use was the first line item. I had used the station's primary array, a significant piece of equipment with substantial operational cost per transmission, to transmit navigational data to a non-partner government without authorization from the station commander. The fact that the data had been accurate and directly responsible for preventing the convoy from crossing a drift field that would have destroyed 2 or 3 ships was noted in the record and placed beside the protocol violation rather than in its place. Both things were real. An unauthorized good outcome and a protocol violation are both real things simultaneously, and treating one as if it eliminates the other is how you build organizations that function correctly only when things go well. I acknowledged both. The courier drone was the second line item. Medical emergency stores deployed to a non-partner vessel, leaving the station without emergency medical supplies for 10 days. Nothing adverse had happened during those 10 days. Commander Patera noted that the absence of an adverse outcome did not change the risk calculus of the decision. She noted, with dry precision, that the decision to deploy the emergency stores had been made without consultation with my shift partner. You made the decision, went to the bay, began loading, and NAC joined you in the process, she said. That is the sequence in the dispatch log. Yes, I said. That is not consultation. No, I said. It isn't. The reason consultation exists, she said, not raising her voice from its standard register, which was moderate and level, and had the quality of someone who has said difficult things many times and has learned that the difficulty is not served by emphasis, is that 2 people examining the same decision from the same information sometimes reach different conclusions. NACT might have suggested a different approach. He might have identified a risk you had not accounted for. He might have known something about the station's medical situation that would have changed the calculus. You did not give him the opportunity to do any of those things. No, I said. I didn't. And he agreed with the decision afterward. Yes. That doesn't change what I just said. I know, I said. She made a note. I said that NACT had helped me load the drone. He assisted after you made the decision, she said. That is support. It is not consultation. NACT, who was present for that session, said that he would have agreed with the decision if consulted, and that he considered the distinction administrative rather than substantive. Commander Patera looked at him for a moment with the expression she reserves for things she is adding to the file. Then she moved on. The ration packs, the drone fuel, we went through them. At the end of the second session, she asked if there was anything she had missed. I thought about it and offered to clarify a point in subsection D that I had worded ambiguously. She read the section, made a note, said it was sufficiently clear. She closed the folder. Dismissed, she said, then as I stood, Voss. I waited. The ration packs were NAC's idea. Including them was his suggestion, I said. The drone dispatch was mine. She looked at the folder. His record will reflect that he assisted in the loading. He assisted fully and without hesitation, I said. I know, she said. That is what it will say. The reprimand was formal, thorough, and correct. It went in my record. It cited the 4 unauthorized actions. It noted that all 4 had contributed to a positive outcome for the distressed party, and that none had resulted in adverse consequences for station personnel. It recommended that the relevant administrative committees review the protocol gaps that had enabled the situation. Specifically, the absence of guidance on how a relay operator should handle an emergency contact, received via legacy directory registration from a non-partner government, and the absence of any independent action threshold for situations where superior officer contact was not possible within a meaningful response window. Commander Patera inserted a final paragraph at her own discretion. It noted that the navigational data transmitted by YOL 9 had been accurate, timely, and directly responsible for preventing the convoy from transiting a documented navigational hazard absent from their own charts. It noted that the courier drone had arrived ahead of any patrol capability. It noted that the outcome of the incident, in the absence of Station YOL 9 intervention, was uncertain. She signed the reprimand. I filed my copy. The formal administrative review of the YOL 9 directory entry took 4 months. A joint committee of the Vethani Concord's Emergency Grid Administration and the relevant Earth Diplomatic Committee reviewed the 203-year registration history, the 9 restructurings, the pending review flags that had been carried forward and never actioned, and the incident record. They produced a report, a recommendation, and a signed agreement. The agreement formalized the registration rather than removing it. It specified authorization protocols for relay operators at registered emergency backup nodes, receiving emergency contacts through legacy directory matches, including independent action thresholds for situations where superior officer contact was not possible within a defined response window. It established a resupply arrangement for station stores deployed in emergency response, and it retroactively authorized, in formal diplomatic language, the specific actions I had taken on the night of the incident. I read that paragraph twice. The formulation the translation layer rendered was something like, the actions described herein are recognized as consistent with the obligations of a registered emergency node, responding to a valid distress broadcast under conditions where superior officer authorization was not obtainable within a meaningful response interval. It is a careful formulation. It does not say the actions were authorized at the time. It says they were consistent with what a registered node was obligated to do. The distinction is administrative. I noted it and filed the summary. Nact read it over my shoulder. They legalized what you already did, he said. Yes. After giving you a reprimand for doing it. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, watching the filed document close into the archive. That seems like the right order to do things, he said, not as a criticism. As an observation about how systems work when they are working correctly, you act on what the situation requires, you account for the action afterward, and the accounting produces the rule that should have existed before. The right order is not comfortable, but it is honest. I wrote Liaison Then, a brief note informing her that the formal agreement had been concluded, and that YOL 9 was now an officially registered emergency backup node in the Vethani grid. Not a legacy entry, not a pending review flag, a current, signed, active registration with an authorization protocol attached and a resupply arrangement in place, and a named diplomatic counterparty on the Vethani side who was responsible for the relationship. Commander Patera forwarded me a copy of the signed agreement as well, without commentary. I read the whole document, all 14 pages of it in the formal language of 2 governments reaching a mutual arrangement, and the thing that struck me most was how unremarkable the final product was. It was a standard emergency node partnership agreement, the kind of document that gets executed when 2 governments decide to formalize a mutual aid arrangement in a shared sector. The only unusual feature was the background section, which referenced the 203-year legacy registration and the incident that had prompted the formalization. Remove that section and you could not tell from the agreement itself that anything unusual had precipitated it. It read like paperwork because that is what it was. She wrote back the same day. The message confirmed the registration update and noted that the incident report she had filed had resulted in a protocol review for convoy routing in the sector, and that the drift field from our survey data had been formally added to the Vethani navigational charts and flagged as a confirmed hazard for all future transit planning. The survey data reference number from our archive had been recorded in the Vethani chart database as the source of the detection. The drift field had a name now. The Vethani Grid Administration had assigned it a formal designation in the current Administrative Naming Convention. In formal Vethani administrative dialect, it translated as Yol Hazard Marker 9, named for the station that had identified it and provided the boundary data. Then had included that detail without commentary at the end of the administrative section before the formal sign-off. I put the note in the file. I have thought about the one-line notation from 203 years ago more than I expected to. A reliable node is not easily replaced. Written by someone I cannot identify, the notation was initialed rather than signed, and the initials resolved to no clear identity in any of the archives then shared with me. A Vethani diplomatic officer, 2 centuries ago, at the end of a handshake, meeting with an Earth delegation about emergency network coverage in a sector that both parties probably expected to become much more important than it turned out to be. Writing a recommendation in the informal notation style, the register you use when you are writing for the file and not for ceremony, recommending that the Earth station be kept in the directory, and then going on to whatever came next, and never following up, and the review never happening, and the entry persisting through 9 restructurings and 203 years of administrative cycles, carried forward each time under a pending review flag that nobody ever reached the top of the list. And specialist knacked, 6 weeks before the incident, replacing the primary array transponder as part of routine maintenance, a standard 2-year cycle. If the maintenance had been deferred, if the transponder had degraded past threshold, the automated confirmation would have failed when the directory query arrived. The grid would not have forwarded the packet. I think about what would have had to go differently for the ping not to reach us. Any of the 9 restructurings could have dropped the entry. Any routine database audit in 203 years could have flagged it for deletion. Any administrator at any point could have looked at the pending review tag and spent 30 seconds removing it. The Vethani diplomatic officer who wrote the one-line notation could have recommended deletion instead of retention. NACT could have deferred the transponder maintenance. The cascade failure on the convoy's lead ship could have happened in a different sector, one where our survey data was not relevant. I could have been at a different posting, watching a different sweep. The packet could have arrived at a different time in the shift cycle, one where I was moving between stations and the console was cycling unattended and the flag sat in the queue for longer. None of those things happened. The entry persisted. The recommendation was for retention. The maintenance ran on time. The cascade happened where our data covered. I was at Yol 9 at 3:40 when the packet arrived, sitting in front of the console with nothing to do but look at it. I have thought about what Thin said about the pending review flag, about whether she would have removed it if she had been the one to look at it. I have thought about the same question from my own side, not about the Vethani entry specifically, but about the general category of things that persist because they are reliable and go unnoticed because they are reliable, and are valuable precisely because they have been reliable long enough that everyone stopped thinking about whether to keep them. The deep relay network runs on that principle. Most of the infrastructure that keeps the outer corridor functional runs on that principle. You plant a station, you maintain it, you run the sweep, and eventually the sweep catches something that wouldn't have been caught otherwise, and you find out that the thing you were doing was worth doing even during the years when nothing was happening. That is not a profound observation. It is a logistical one. But I have found that logistical observations are often the ones that hold weight longest. The inquiry is closed. The reprimand is in the file. The formal agreement is in the diplomatic archive. The Yol Hazard Marker 9 is in the Vethani charts, which means the next convoy that transits that corridor will have the data we had, and will plot around the drift field without being told to, because the hazard will be on the chart and the chart will be accurate. That is the part of the outcome that is permanent and does not depend on anyone's authorization. 11 months ago, I had requested this posting because I wanted to watch nothing in a quiet sector. A posting where the sweep ran clean, where the days were procedural and the nights were quiet and the only sounds were the hum of the array and the recycling systems, and on good shifts, the particular silence of a sector with nothing happening in it. On the night of the incident, I was 4 hours into a shift that had given me exactly that. The waveform display was clean. The sweep was cycling. The coffee was mediocre and the station was quiet. And then the ping arrived and I read it and it was something. I forwarded the packet. I sent the data. I loaded the drone. I ran the sweep. The protocol reprimand is in my record. The Yol Hazard Marker 9 is in the Vethani charts. The formal agreement is in the diplomatic archive. The courier drone is back in its bay, restocked. The emergency medical cabinet is restocked. The fuel reserve is replenished. Specialist NACT replaced the primary array transponder last week as part of the routine maintenance cycle. On schedule, as always. The transponder is new, and the automated confirmation function runs clean on the diagnostic check, and the station's registration in the Vethani emergency grid is current and valid. If someone sends a sector-wide distress ping in range of the array, we will receive it. That is what being on the list means. The sweep runs clean. Nothing is happening in the sector. I am watching it anyway.